What would you say to global leaders who choose silence when Gaza is being devastated?
They're liars, they're cowardly because they know what's going on. And just 2 days ago, there's a report that over 80% of genocide scholars internationally agree that what's happening right now is genocide. Palestinian trauma has been documented for decades. It's to be suppressed, to be a non citizen in your own country. I'm talking about the West Bank now. To be always under attack, to have children watch their parents being humiliated. My country is letting it happen. Your country is letting it happen. Much of the West is supporting it economically, militarily, politically. And more recently, a study last year showed that many children in Gaza, young children, think about death. Imagine 4 or 5 years old having to think about death. But I was told that there's no post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post. It's ongoing.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I am Muneef Khan, and today we are honored to speak with Dr. Gabor Maté, physician, author, Holocaust survivor, and one of the most outspoken voices calling the assault on Gaza by its true name, genocide. Drawing on his expertise in trauma and his own history as a survivor, Dr. Mate has challenged the silence surrounding Gaza and reminded us that never again must mean never again for anyone. Dr. Mate, we are grateful for your courage and for being here to share your perspective on this urgent and enforced humanitarian crisis. Thank you for joining us. My first question, and it comes more on the subject of the language of genocide. You've been one of the few Jewish voices who's publicly calling what's happening in Gaza as a genocide. But what I want to get back on this and what I want to understand is what led you to use that word and why do you believe it's so important to name it?
Well, first of all, to tell you the truth, when people started to use the word genocide in relation to Gaza, I didn't like it because I thought of genocide in terms of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe that swept away so many people's lives, including almost my own and those of my grandparents. And I thought of it as a deliberate attempt to kill people, to exterminate them. And I didn't think Gaza was a deliberate attempt to exterminate people. But then it turns out it's not up to me to decide what genocide is. There's an internationally agreed upon, legally defined understanding of what genocide is. And according to many scholars of genocide, in fact, most scholars of genocide, including very prominent Jewish Israeli scholars of the Holocaust, what is happening in Gaza does meet the criteria for genocide. So it's not a subjective term, it's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of legal um, and internationally agreed upon definition. So that's the first point. As to why it's important to talk about it that way, because it turns out that you don't need gas chambers to meet the criteria for genocide. 2,000-pound bombs dropped on civilians meets the criteria. The attempt to destroy the political and national existence of a people by killing many of them meets the criteria. And that's what we're seeing happening in Gaza right now. Um, why is it important to talk about it? Look, when I was growing up, I could never understand. Once I came to terms with what happened to the Jews in Eastern Europe, and once I understood the full horror of it, I couldn't understand how the world could let it happen. I couldn't understand how the humanity could stand by. Mind you, the difference is, at that time, the Germans went to a lot of trouble to hide what they were doing. This did not happen on television. It did not happen on TikTok. It didn't happen on YouTube, on Instagram. So when we ask the question, how could the world stand by? It's much more compelling to ask it right now because then people couldn't have known the exact details. Some details got out, but the world, for the most part, did not know, and people did not witness it. Now we're witnessing it every day, and we're still letting it happen. And my country is letting it happen. Your country is letting it happen. Much of the West is supporting it economically, militarily, politically. So this question of naming it and bearing witness to it, I think it's the most morally compelling question of the day. Not that there isn't suffering elsewhere. There's suffering in your country. There's racism everywhere. But the degree of cruelty, brutality, and open, gleeful imposition of suffering, that's unique right now when it comes to Gaza.
And coming back to the same question itself, what do you say to people who struggle with this term? And in addition to that, to those who accuse critics of Israel of being anti-Semitic?
Well, as to what do I say about the critics of the phrase, I say look up the international definition. Look up all the scholars, the Jewish scholars, Israeli scholars, international scholars of genocide who are calling this genocide. So it's not a subjective term. It's an objective term based on, again, a consensus. And just 2 days ago, there was a report that over 80% of genocide scholars internationally agree that what's happening right now is genocide. So you can go argue with the experts, number one. Number two, as to anti-Semitism, well, I have three things to say about it, I think. Let's begin with the fact that, first of all, it's a cynical political move. Abba Eban, who used to be Israel's foreign minister at some point and was some point the its representative, ambassador to the United Nations, he wrote an article in 1973. He wrote this article in 1973 in a Jewish magazine. And he said that the way you deal with critics of Israel is if they are not Jewish, you call them anti-Semites. And if they are Jewish, you call them self-hating Jews. So it was a cynical political move. And Shulamit Aloni, who used to be the Minister of Education in Israel, said that, yeah, if somebody criticizes Israel in Europe, we bring up the Holocaust. If they do it in the United States, we call them anti-Semites. So it's a strictly cynical political move on one level. On another level, the Jewish people have suffered a lot, and nobody needs to prove that. We know it. And in the Jewish mind, there's a real fear. And a lot of Jews are brought up with this fear. They're brought up in their schools, in their homes, uh, with the memory of the Holocaust and all the persecutions that took place throughout history. And what they're never told is the history of Palestine. So that most Jewish people, like most Canadian people, don't know the history of the indigenous people in Canada. Most Americans don't know the history of the indigenous people, of what happened to them in the United States. The British Empire, which helped to found the Jewish entity in Palestine, came to India. We know what it did in India. The starvation it caused, the oppression, the exploitation, the robbery of resources, the killing of tens of thousands of people throughout history. The average British person never hears a word about that. You go to Trafalgar Square and you see all these statues of all these mass murderers who killed people in Africa and Asia and India. In the same way, most Jewish people are never taught about the history of the Palestinians, of what actually happened in Palestine, of how the same British Empire that oppressed so much of the world also took over Palestine and found it in its interest to support Jewish immigration and the creation of a Jewish entity. So, in the absence of knowing the history of Palestine, and with this historical sensitivity and hypersensitivity, to them, any attack in Israel, any criticism of Israel seems like anti-Semitism. It's an honest mistake, but it's a tragic one, and it's unfortunately supported and magnified by the Western media, because the Western media does not tell the truth about what's happening in Palestine. So people naturally think that if you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite. The good news is that fewer and fewer people are buying that anymore. Fewer and fewer Jewish people are buying it. There's many more young Jewish people who are standing up for Palestine, who are saying, no, this is not anti-Semitism, to stand in favor of Palestinian freedom, and we're not accepting the story anymore that we're always the victim and we're only the victim and we have the right to do anything to anybody. So it's changing. It's taking time.
And now I'd want to come to the trauma oppression aspect of this conversation. And from your perspective, especially as a trauma expert, how do you understand the intergenerational trauma of both Palestinians living under siege and Jewish people shaped by the Holocaust?
Well, the let's take the two separately.
Yes.
The Palestinian trauma has been documented for decades. It's to be suppressed, to be a non-citizen in your own country. I'm talking about the West Bank now. To be always under attack, to have children watch their parents being humiliated. And in Gaza specifically, there was a study done in 2004 that showed that over 90% of children in Gaza then had traumatic symptoms. They were wetting their beds. I wet my bed, by the way, till I was 13 years of age because of what happened to me as an infant, as a Jewish infant. They were wetting their beds. They were aggressive towards their parents. They had anxiety. They had depression. And more recently, a study last year showed that many children in Gaza, young children, think about death. Imagine 4 or 5 years old having to think about death. That's hugely traumatic. And there's a Palestinian psychiatrist, Dr. Sama Jabbar, who wrote a book called Radiance, for which I wrote the foreword. It's coming out this year. And she talks about what it's like to treat people under occupation. And the example that I always mention, an 80-year-old, 81 or 80-year-old man comes to her, for suicidal depression, which is caused by the fact that the home that he built with his own hands 20 years ago, now he has to destroy with his own hands, forced to do so by the Israeli occupation, because they never gave him permission to build on his own land, which they don't give to Palestinians. So when Palestinians build homes on their own lands, they're forced to destroy it, or the Israeli army comes and bulldozes it. The trauma is endless and is daily. And when I was working there in Palestine 3 years ago with women who'd been tortured in Israeli jails, and tens of thousands of Palestinians have been through Israeli jails, tortured, including young children. Nobody talks about that. But I was told that there's no post-traumatic stress disorder here because the trauma is never post. It's ongoing. So it's unspeakable and the impacts are severe. Um, as far as the Jewish trauma, it's true that trauma is multi-generational. So the trauma that I sustained as an infant, um, I passed some of that on to my kids. I didn't mean to, but I did. So the Jewish trauma has been passed on from generation to generation, but it's been reinforced by a historical narrative that makes us the victims all the time. So that not only do you have the trauma, you also have the reinforcement by a false version of history, a version of history that's been debunked and refuted by Israeli Jewish scholars over and over and over again, who've told the truth, who've done their research, who have shown what happened in 1948, the massacre and the expulsion of Palestinians, the rape of Palestinians, the robbery of their homes, the destruction of their 500 of their villages. This has been documented by Israeli Jewish scholars. The average Jewish person, I should say the average person in the West, never hears about it. So in the absence of that knowledge again, it just seems like more anti-Semitism. And October the 7th, they keep saying this phrase that it's the largest number of Jews killed in one day since the Holocaust. That's a completely outrageously false statement. It's false not because factually it's not true. It's false because of its implication. Those people were not killed because they were Jews. They were killed because the Palestinians saw them as occupiers of their own lands. And had those occupiers been French or Indian or Chinese, that would have been the people killed on October the 7th. I'm not justifying October the 7th. I'm saying that it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It has to do with the real desperation of a people breaking out of a blockade and a concentration camp. People have been bombed and killed and massacred for decades, filled with hatred and filled with despair. And actually, what's surprising is when I visit Palestine, when I've been to Gaza, to the West Bank, including recently, I don't meet any hatred as a Jew. I meet welcome. I meet people who just want their stories to be understood.
If I may interrupt, also that was going to be my next question about when you first visited Gaza. You described that you were crying for weeks
Yeah,
afterwards. Could you share
yeah. I wasn't crying. Yeah, when I first visited the occupied territories in during the first Intifada, and I went with a medical delegation to look at the medical care under the occupation, under the conditions of the Intifada. And I went from refugee camp to refugee camp, and I was in Jabalia refugee camp, which Israel has just destroyed recently, killing a lot of people. Seeing these cement hovels in which these people who had been expelled from their homeland had to live, so that I have the right to go there and move there as a Jew. I have the right to become a citizen. I have the right to get land because I'm a Jew from Europe. And the Palestinians who were born there, whose parents and grandparents and great grandparents have been there for generations and generations, they don't have the right to go back to their homes. They're living in these hovels in the sands of Gaza. Of course I cried. I couldn't help it. It's just, it was, and that was over 30 years ago now. It's much worse now.
And
When I was there 3 years ago, I wasn't in Gaza. I was in the West Bank. It was much worse 3 years ago than it had been when I was there
could you
first.
could you describe maybe something that you saw for our audience to understand? Because I would appreciate if you could describe an instance.
Well, again, I did a workshop seminar for women who'd been tortured in Israeli jails. And when you listen to how they were tortured, the clever, cruel, psychologically astute. One woman was being interrogated and she began her menstruation period during the interrogation. She starts bleeding. They laugh at her. They don't give her any clothing. They don't give her any help. They just let her sit there and bleed and they laugh at her. Now, what's that about? It's about denying people their dignity. It's about making them feel completely dominated. People are tortured and screaming, and the screams are channeled into the cells of the other people. And then the checkpoints, where Palestinians, as a Jew, I could go through the checkpoints like that. And I could go to different checkpoints where they just wave at you because we had the right license plate. But if you're Palestinian, going to hospital, trying to give birth, they make you wait for hours at the checkpoints. Or they question you, or they'd make you turn back. People can't visit their relatives if they're Palestinians. If you're Jewish, hey, whatever you want. This is what goes on. Every day it goes on.
And if I may ask, why do you think so much of the mainstream media avoids framing? I mean, first of all, avoids covering this in depth and also avoids framing what's happening as genocide. I mean, we've seen the complicity of so-called media organizations, which are quote unquote renowned organizations. But I think in a personal capacity, all of us now must be disagreeing with that now.
Well, when you look at the media historically, it's not so surprising. During the Vietnam War, which some of your listeners might remember, um, the Americans said that the North Vietnamese had attacked an American battleship in the Gulf of Tonkin, which then gave them the reason to bomb Vietnam and kill hundreds of thousands of people. That incident never happened. The media could have known that it never happened had they done a little bit of investigation. All the lies that the Americans told about Vietnam, the media repeated and magnified. They were a megaphone for the American government. Later on, it turns out it was all a pack of lies. But that was after 3 million Vietnamese had been killed and the country had been devastated. And the bombing of Cambodia and Laos. Then, so if you remember the war in Iraq, any 5-year-old child with half a brain knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein possessed. They didn't exist. The United States stands in the United Nations and shows evidence of the weapons of mass destruction. And the British press and the American press all repeat weapons of mass destruction. What's the result? 500,000 Iraqi civilians killed. Years later, the truth comes out. Oh, we made a mistake. Well, the same thing is happening right now because the press is not independent. We talk about independent media and free press. Free from what? Not from the control of the people that own it. And the billionaires that own the media are completely aligned with the American government. So that's why you never see the truth about anything that the American government wants to fool the people about. The media will line up, especially when it comes to imperial policy, especially when it comes to foreign policy. It's like I said, the British people still have not been told what happened in India. The Belgian people are now beginning to be told that their country killed 12 million Congolese in the late 19th, early 20th century. But when these things are happening, the media will never tell the truth. We're lucky if they tell the truth decades later.
And I want to come down to now the aspect of healing and hope. As someone has dedicated your life to understanding trauma. What message of solidarity or compassion would you want to share with the people watching in Gaza?
Well, if you look at the history of any country that has been under oppression or foreign domination or internal injustice, this struggle has been going on for thousands of years. But what is it that inspires us? What is it that still keeps us demanding and insisting upon freedom and justice? Because as human beings, that's our nature. There's something in us that demands freedom, that demands justice. In face of all the lies, in face of all the distortions, in face of all the propaganda, look at these people who are going on this flotilla right now. They're never going to get there. The Israeli army will stop them on their seas, as they always do, like the pirates that they are. But they're doing it, aren't they? Because the truth and justice matters more to them than this victory or that victory. So what I'm saying to people is this is a long-term struggle. And if your heart is breaking, good. That means you're an alive human being. If your heart is not breaking, then you're either blind or your heart is closed. So what I'm saying is justice and freedom are human imperatives, they're human impulses, they're human drives, and that'll keep us going in the face of injustice, in the face of setbacks, in the face of horrible suffering. That will never be extinguished.
And there is also another side to this question, which I wanted to ask in my personal capacity to
Yeah,
people who feel helpless as they witness it from afar. I've been covering this for the past 2 years. I'm in touch with people in Gaza day in and day out. And the question I wanted to ask is that, what would you say to those who witness this from afar but still want to remain present to the truth of what's happening? Because these are beyond horrific, what we see on a daily basis.
it's beyond belief what we're seeing and what the world is allowing it to happen. Um, well, look, first of all, they want you to feel helpless. They want you to feel isolated. They want you to feel everything you do is futile. And it's true. I've been speaking about this subject for decades. Certainly, I have been for the last 2 years. Um, Millions of people have seen my talks. Millions of people have seen the talks by the wonderful Francesca Albanese, the UN rapporteur. They've seen talks by Norman Finkelstein, the American scholar, Ilan Pappé, the Israeli historian. They've seen the Palestinians speak. They've seen Muhammad al-Kurd speak. They've seen um, um, all the wonderful, articulate people from Gaza, the journalists who put their lives on the line. And none of that has saved a single life. But has it been useless? No. Because when you talk to the people in Gaza, it makes every difference in the world to them that some people notice them, that some people support them, that some people feel with them, that some people, many people, millions, hundreds of millions of people understand their experience. That makes a big difference. And if you feel totally helpless, do something. Speak out. Send, I don't know, 5 rupees, whatever you can afford, to whatever organization, and talk to other people so you don't feel isolated. Because it's terrible to be alone with this burden. That's what I would say to people.
And this brings me to my final question. And this is more targeted towards the global leaders. What would you say to global leaders who choose silence while Gaza is being devastated?
You might as well ask me what I would say to Adolf Hitler. What would I say to Adolf Hitler? I have nothing to say to Adolf Hitler. These people are blind, they're opportunistic, they're venal, they're hypocritical, they're liars, they're cowardly. I'm speaking objectively because they know what's going on. So what can I have to say to them? I would say to them, there is history. You will not be remembered well. There is humanity, and those people who are in touch with their humanity, they see what you're doing. They see it. You live with that. That's your choice. I would not want to be sharing your split, suppressed, hypocritical, selfish state of mind. I would not want to be sharing that state of mind. And some of you, because historically this is always the case, even some of the Nazi criminals later on had conscience struggles and they felt terrible about what they had done. A few of them. Some of you will wake up. I just hope it happens sooner rather than later. That's all I would say to them.
I really appreciate you joining us, Dr. Mate, and it's been an honor talking to you. And please continue to do what you're doing. And I hope to reconnect with you again in the future. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much. Thank you for having me. You take care.
Yeah.